Fort Knox, officially called the United States Bullion Depository, stands in Kentucky as one of the most secure and enigmatic structures in the world. Completed in 1936 at the height of the Great Depression, it was designed to house the nation's gold reserves at a time when America shifted to centralize its bullion under government control. The facility is surrounded by myths, secrecy, and near-legendary defenses, earning it a reputation as the strongest fortress in the United States. Managed by the U.S. Department of the Treasury and protected by the U.S. Mint Police, it has long been associated with untouchable wealth and ultimate security. Officially, Fort Knox was built to store the vast quantities of gold that flowed into the U.S. after President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1933 executive order required citizens to surrender most of their privately held gold. In its early years, shipments of bullion arrived by train, guarded by soldiers and armored convoys, eventually filling vaults with thousands of tons of gold bars. The building itself is a fortress of concrete and granite, encircled by fences, minefields, and armed guards, while its vault is said to be sealed by a massive 22-ton door that requires multiple combinations known only by different staff members. At its peak, Fort Knox reportedly held more than 20,000 tons of gold, symbolizing America's economic strength during the 20th century. Today, though, official figures suggest that around half of the nation's reserves remain inside. Its true contents are a matter of speculation and debate. Very few outsiders have ever entered the vault, and even fewer have seen the gold firsthand, making Fort Knox not only a treasure house but also a symbol of secrecy, wealth, and enduring national mythology. The construction of Fort Knox was deeply tied to the economic and political climate of the 1930s, a period when the United States was still reeling from the Great Depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration took dramatic steps to stabilize the economy, one of which was Executive Order 6102 in 1933, which required Americans to turn in most of their privately owned gold to the government in exchange for paper currency. This unprecedented move gave the U.S. Treasury control of massive quantities of bullion, and a secure facility was needed to store it. The Kentucky site was chosen because it was inland, far from vulnerable coastal attacks, and already housed a major army post that provided natural military protection. Construction began in 1936, using steel, concrete, and granite to create a fortress designed to withstand not only theft but also wartime assaults. Workers poured thousands of cubic yards of concrete and reinforced the structure with steel beams, while surrounding it with fences, guard towers, and patrol roads. When completed, the depository featured a bomb-resistant roof, thick granite walls, and a vault encased in protective layers. Shipments of gold began arriving in 1937, transported in high-security trains guarded by soldiers and federal agents. By the end of that decade, Fort Knox had become the heart of America's gold holdings, containing billions of dollars worth of bullion in its underground chambers. The timing was critical with World War II looming. Fort Knox also served as a safeguard for not just gold but also priceless treasures, including original copies of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and even foreign assets protected during wartime. The building of Fort Knox was more than just an economic necessity. It was a statement of power, a physical fortress symbolizing America's determination to secure its wealth and heritage in uncertain times. The design and defenses of Fort Knox have made it legendary, often described as the most secure vault on Earth. The structure itself is built of reinforced concrete lined with granite, creating walls that are more than 2 feet thick. At its core lies the famous vault, sealed by a massive 22-ton door said to be virtually indestructible. Unlike typical locks, this door requires multiple combinations to open, with no single person possessing the entire code, ensuring that access always requires the cooperation of several officials. Inside, the vault consists of smaller compartments stacked with gold bars, each weighing about 27 pounds. Security extends far beyond the vault itself. The depository is surrounded by steel fences, guard towers, motion detectors, and minefields, while heavily armed US Mint Police patrol the perimeter 24/7. The nearby Fort Knox Army Base, home to thousands of soldiers and armored divisions, adds another layer of military protection. The airspace above the facility is restricted, with trespassing aircraft subject to immediate military response. It is also rumored that underground tunnels, electrified fences, and advanced surveillance systems enhance security, though many details remain classified. During its long history, no successful robbery has ever been attempted. and even Hollywood heists treat the idea of breaking into Fort Knox as fantasy. The defenses are so formidable that the very phrase, "as secure as Fort Knox," has entered everyday language as a metaphor for absolute safety. These layers of physical, technological, and military safeguards ensure that the gold inside remains untouchable. Whether or not it still holds as much as legends claim, the facility's reputation for being impenetrable is unquestioned. Fort Knox is less a simple vault and more a fortress designed to withstand every conceivable threat, from thieves to war itself. At its peak, Fort Knox held an astonishing amount of wealth, making it one of the most valuable sites on the planet. By the early 1940s, the depository contained nearly 650 million troy ounces of gold, equivalent to over 20,000 tons, representing the majority of America's bullion reserves. This massive stockpile gave the United States unmatched financial strength, especially during World War II, when gold was the ultimate measure of global currency stability. Nations around the world trusted the dollar because it was directly backed by physical gold, stored in vaults like those at Fort Knox. The depository's reputation as the centerpiece of US wealth grew during this period, symbolizing both security and economic dominance. Massive shipments of bullion, arriving in high-security trains, escorted by armed guards, added to the mystique of the fortress. During World War II, Fort Knox's importance went beyond gold. It also safeguarded priceless treasures, including original copies of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, as well as foreign valuables such as the Hungarian crown jewels. These actions cemented its role as not only America's treasury but also a guardian of heritage and history. The sheer scale of gold stored there became a symbol of national pride, with the phrase "backed by gold" tied directly to the strength of the dollar. However, the situation began to change in the 1970s when the United States abandoned the gold standard under President Richard Nixon, ending the direct convertibility of dollars into gold. While Fort Knox continued to store bullion, its symbolic role shifted from backing currency to representing secure reserves of national wealth. Even so, the idea of America's financial might is still often linked to the image of gold bricks stacked inside Fort Knox, a powerful reminder of the era when the fortress literally embodied the nation's economic supremacy. Despite its legendary reputation, Fort Knox has long been at the center of controversy and conspiracy theories, many of which question whether the gold is actually still inside. Because the vault has been opened to outsiders only a handful of times in its history, suspicion has grown over the decades. The most famous public inspection occurred in 1974, when U.S. officials and a small group of journalists were allowed a brief glimpse into the vault. They reported seeing stacks of gold bars, but critics argued that the visit was highly staged and far from a full audit. Since then, calls for transparency have continued, with some politicians demanding an independent audit of the nation's gold reserves. Skeptics claim that much of the bullion may have been sold, leased, or moved without public knowledge, leaving the vaults empty or nearly so. Others suggest that the secrecy itself is a deliberate tactic, meant to keep potential adversaries uncertain. This lack of consistent verification has fueled endless speculation, with theories ranging from the government secretly using the gold to fund wars to claims that the vaults are filled with fake bars made of tungsten. The Treasury and Federal Reserve insist that the gold remains secure and accounted for, but the absence of regular audits leaves room for doubt. Beyond conspiracy, the secrecy has symbolic implications. Fort Knox represents not just security but trust in government stewardship of national wealth. When that trust is questioned, it shakes confidence in more than just bullion. It challenges faith in the system itself, whether the doubts are legitimate or exaggerated. They have helped transform Fort Knox from a simple storage facility into a cultural mystery, a place where secrecy and myth are stacked as heavily as the gold bars it is said to protect. Fort Knox has transcended its physical role as a depository to become a cultural icon, symbolizing wealth, power, and unbreakable security. The very phrase "as secure as Fort Knox" is used worldwide to describe anything considered impenetrable. From bank vaults to digital systems, popular culture has amplified this reputation, often portraying the facility as the ultimate treasure vault. One of the most famous depictions came in the 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger, where the villain plots to raid Fort Knox, reinforcing its image as the most coveted vault on Earth. Numerous television shows, novels, and documentaries have also referenced the fortress, either as a symbol of absolute protection or as a mysterious place shrouded in secrecy. Beyond entertainment, Fort Knox's aura has seeped into public imagination as a metaphor for untouchable wealth. inspiring everything from marketing campaigns to everyday jokes. The irony, however, is that while millions know the name, almost no one knows what truly lies inside. This paradox fuels both fascination and skepticism, with Fort Knox functioning as much as a myth as a physical site. Its pop culture portrayals exaggerate its role, making it a stage for elaborate heists and conspiracy theories, yet those very stories keep its mystique alive. Even in music and advertising, Fort Knox is invoked as the standard of ultimate security and value. In this way, the depository has become more than a government facility. It is a global symbol embedded in language, storytelling, and imagination, whether viewed as a fortress of gold, a cultural metaphor, or a backdrop for intrigue. Fort Knox occupies a unique place where reality and legend blur. Its walls hold not only bullion but also decades of myths that have turned it into one of the most recognized yet least understood sites in America. The secrecy surrounding Fort Knox has only deepened its mystique, as access to the depository is almost non-existent for outsiders. Since its construction in 1936, only a handful of visits have been permitted, and even those were highly restricted. One of the earliest came in 1943, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau Jr., toured the vault during World War II. Decades later, in 1974, a rare media event allowed a small group of congressmen and journalists to briefly step inside. They were shown stacks of gold bars behind heavy gates, a gesture meant to silence growing speculation that the vault was empty. Yet the visit was carefully orchestrated, with observers allowed only into selected areas, leaving critics unsatisfied. Since then, the depository has been almost completely off-limits, with no comprehensive independent audit conducted. Even presidents themselves have rarely entered, with some reports claiming that not all commanders-in-chief have been given full access. The extreme secrecy is intentional. Officials argue that revealing too much would compromise the security of the gold and expose vulnerabilities to potential threats. The building's design reinforces this philosophy, with multiple layers of security that ensure no single individual has total access to the vault. For instance, the door's combination is divided among several staff members, so cooperation is required to open it. Every approach to the facility is monitored, and photography or recording of its interior is forbidden. To the public, this level of secrecy appears excessive, feeding rumors and conspiracy theories about what really lies inside. To the government, however, it is a necessary safeguard, ensuring that Fort Knox remains an untouchable stronghold. The scarcity of first-hand accounts keeps the mystery alive, making Fort Knox not just a vault but a legend hidden behind steel and granite. While Fort Knox is most famous for storing gold, its role has occasionally extended beyond bullion to safeguarding priceless treasures during times of national crisis. During World War II, officials feared that key symbols of American democracy and heritage could be destroyed in a potential attack on Washington, D.C. To protect them, the original copies of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence were secretly moved to Fort Knox for safekeeping. Alongside these founding documents, other invaluable items such as the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln's second inaugural address were also temporarily stored within the depository's granite walls. The facility even protected foreign treasures, such as the Hungarian crown jewels, which were hidden at Fort Knox to prevent them from falling into Nazi or Soviet hands. By housing these artifacts, Fort Knox served not only as a vault for gold but also as a fortress for history, preserving irreplaceable symbols of freedom and cultural identity. These extraordinary measures demonstrated the depository's importance as more than just a financial stronghold. It was also a guardian of civilization's most treasured legacies. When the war ended, the documents and treasures were returned to their rightful places. But the episode cemented Fort Knox's reputation as America's ultimate safe haven. To this day, many Americans remain unaware that the fortress once sheltered the very documents that define the nation's ideals. This dual purpose, protecting both wealth and heritage, adds to the site's mystique, blending monetary security with cultural preservation. In times of great danger, Fort Knox has proven capable of becoming more than a vault. It transforms into a sanctuary where the essence of a nation can be hidden away from the chaos of war. Its walls have guarded not just gold, but the very symbols of liberty itself. Today, Fort Knox still plays a role in housing part of America's gold reserves, but its significance has shifted since the United States left the gold standard in 1971. Official records from the U.S. Treasury state that the depository holds about 147 million troy ounces of gold, roughly 4,580 tons representing more than half of the nation's official reserves. This makes it one of the largest single collections of bullion in the world. However, unlike in the past, the gold no longer directly backs the US dollar, which is now a fiat currency supported by economic stability and trust rather than metal. As a result, Fort Knox functions less as a foundation for daily financial transactions and more as a symbolic and strategic reserve. Critics argue that in a modern economy driven by global markets, digital banking, and complex financial systems, the bullion stored there is less relevant than it once was. Yet others contend that in times of extreme crisis such as hyperinflation, financial collapse, or geopolitical upheaval, the gold could once again become invaluable, serving as a last resort guarantee of America's wealth. While the Treasury insists the reserves are secure, calls for an independent audit continue to surface, reflecting ongoing public doubts. Despite these debates, the name Fort Knox still carries weight, embodying the idea of unbreakable security and hidden wealth. Its role today may be more symbolic than operational, but that symbolism is powerful. Fort Knox remains a reminder of both America's economic history and its preparedness for future uncertainty. Whether or not its vaults still contain every ounce claimed, the fortress endures as a living monument to financial resilience and secrecy, its granite walls silently guarding the nation's most famous treasure. Around the world, Fort Knox is as much a legend as it is a real place, and this dual identity has fueled endless myths, criticisms, and fascination. Because so few people have ever been allowed inside, speculation about what lies within its vaults has flourished for decades. Some conspiracy theories suggest that the gold has been secretly sold or swapped to foreign banks, while others claim that much of it has been replaced with fake bars made of tungsten coated in gold. The US Treasury has repeatedly dismissed such allegations, insisting the reserves remain intact, yet the lack of regular independent audits continues to feed suspicion. Beyond conspiracy, critics also argue that the secrecy surrounding Fort Knox reflects a troubling lack of transparency in how national wealth is safeguarded. Calls from lawmakers and watchdog groups for a full public accounting of the gold have been made multiple times, but only partial verifications have ever taken place. On the other hand, defenders argue that such secrecy is a necessary element of security. If details about the vault's contents and defenses were widely known, they could become a target for adversaries. Outside of policy debates, Fort Knox has become part of global culture, often invoked as a metaphor for impenetrable security. Its name is attached to banks, data centers, and even password managers, each claiming Fort Knox-level protection. To the public, the image of gold stacked high behind massive steel doors remains irresistible, even if the reality may be more mundane. In truth, Fort Knox has come to symbolize more than gold. It embodies the balance between security, secrecy, and trust in government. Whether it holds a mountain of bullion or far less than claimed, its mythology ensures that Fort Knox will always occupy a unique place in the world's imagination. One of the most debated aspects of Fort Knox is the question of inspections and accountability, as its contents have rarely been verified by outsiders. Since the depository's construction in 1936, only a handful of official visits have taken place, each one tightly controlled. The most famous occurred in September 1974, when Treasury Secretary William Simon invited a group of reporters and members of Congress to tour part of the vault in response to mounting public pressure and conspiracy theories. The delegation saw gold bars stacked behind steel grates and was allowed to touch a few, but critics dismissed the event as a staged demonstration rather than a full audit. Since then, very few external figures have been permitted inside. Even presidents themselves are not automatically granted access, reinforcing the idea that entry is reserved for only the most essential personnel. Calls for a comprehensive, independent audit of the gold have echoed for decades, with some lawmakers arguing that public trust requires transparency, especially given the symbolic weight of Fort Knox. However, the US Treasury and Mint maintain that routine internal audits are performed and that the reserves remain secure and accounted for. Still, the refusal to conduct a widely publicized verification leaves room for skepticism, making Fort Knox a recurring point of political debate. In times of economic uncertainty, politicians and commentators frequently invoke the fortress, either to reassure the public that America's wealth is safe or to question whether the government is being fully honest about its holdings. The secrecy that protects the site is both its strength and its weakness. It deters threats but fuels rumors. This paradox ensures that Fort Knox will always be more than just a vault. It is a political symbol, a lightning rod for questions of trust, transparency, and national strength, Fort Knox endures as one of America's most iconic and mysterious strongholds, a place where history, myth, and symbolism converge. Built in the shadows of the Great Depression and World War II, it became the centerpiece of the nation's financial security, housing a staggering quantity of bullion that once underpinned the global dominance of the US dollar. Over the decades, its image has expanded far beyond economics. It is a fortress of secrecy, a cultural metaphor for impenetrability, and a constant subject of debate and speculation. Whether or not every ounce of gold is still locked within its vaults, the very idea of Fort Knox continues to capture global imagination. Its granite walls and steel doors represent not only wealth but also the nation's desire to shield its most valuable assets from disaster, theft, or war. To some, it is a reassuring symbol of preparedness, proof that America still holds tangible treasure in an age of digital money and financial uncertainty. To others, it is a troubling emblem of secrecy and elitism, raising questions about transparency and accountability. This duality is what gives Fort Knox its enduring power. It is at once a physical fortress and a cultural myth, a real building with a legendary reputation. As long as the vault remains sealed to public eyes, the mystery will continue, fueling speculation, conspiracy, and fascination. In the end, Fort Knox may never reveal all its secrets, but perhaps that is part of its purpose. Its value lies not only in the gold it protects, but in the aura of invincibility it projects. As a symbol, it reminds the world that America's wealth and strength are guarded with unmatched vigilance. Even if what lies behind those massive doors remains hidden in shadow,